Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
Well, good morning, my brothers. I'm sorry I was a little tarde, late this morning. It was those last 3 snooze buttons that get me in trouble. I thought it would be good, prior to the talk, just to read you the purpose of the Gay Buddhist Fellowship. The Gay Buddhist Fellowship supports Buddhist practice in the gay men's community. It is a forum that brings together the diverse Buddhist traditions to address the spiritual concerns of gay men in the San Francisco Bay Area, the United States, and the world. The Gay Buddhist Fellowship's mission includes cultivating a social environment that is inclusive and caring. I remember when I first read that, it was a wonderful source of inspiration, and continues to be for me. I hope for many of you also. We use this time to introduce ourselves. My name is Howard.
Doug.
Kay.
Carl.
John.
Nichols.
George. Paul. Michael. 3. Terry.
What?
Josh.
Jim.
Peter. David. Jack.
Oh. Bill.
I expected a compliment.
Snake. Will.
Paul.
Carl.
Jim. Marty.
Jay.
And I'm Bill.
And anyone here for the first time? Special welcome to you. We'll have an opportunity for announcements following the Dharma reflection. It's my privilege to introduce to you this morning Bill Weber, friend and fellow servant on the kitchen crew for the Hamilton Homeless Shelter, one of the many services of the Gay Buddhist Fellowship. Bill is a Vipassana practitioner studying under, who's that?
Eugene Cash.
Under Eugene Cash. He's presently working with the virus called the flu and learning much of his practice from that encounter. As we all are. I love this time of season because I always get a cold and then I get a really good bass voice. It's a great time for practicing chanting. Also, the co-producer of the wonderful film The Coquettes. So it's a co-director. Bill, welcome.
Thank you. I'll try to speak up. As was said, I'm just getting over the flu, and it is an amazing time to practice because I find a lot of avoidance goes on then. I don't want to be with my body because it's just sort of uncomfortable, and I just sort of want to lose the present moment by getting lost in television or something. And but I also find if I do pay attention to the body and to what the present moment is, it's very different because the body feels very different when you're sick. It's very heavy and dark, and it moves differently, the energy's different. So it's actually sort of an interesting time to pay attention. I've spoken here a few times before, and it's nice to be back here at the beginning of the year. And it was pretty clear to me when Clint asked me a couple months ago what I wanted to talk about. It was pretty clear to me what I wanted to talk about. I turned 50 last year, and one attribute I really wanted to develop on the second half of the 50 on, whatever it is, of my life was the attribute of generosity. And I'd like to talk about generosity today. And I think it's an appropriate thing to talk about as an attribute to think about as a New Year's resolution, or something to think about as a guiding force in the new year. I certainly consider this myself. I see greed as being one of the great ills that is afflicting us and the planet right now. As much as I love America, one thing I really feel like we're exporting sometimes is greed. I think greed is what is the main problem in Iraq, and the main problem with going on in the environment and with corporations and whatever. It's just sort of unchecked greed that's not paid attention to. And I certainly have my own personal relationship with greed. I know what it feels like. I have it. I've felt it, all my life. There are times when I want something, and there's times when I don't want to give something, and there's times when I'm very afraid of losing something, and I want to hold on to it. And that greed isn't a very pleasant feeling most of the time. It's very tight. There's an unsatisfaction that goes along with it, and it's never really satisfied. And there's a fear around it a lot of times of not having enough. Generosity is really one of the foundations of a good Buddhist practice. When the Buddha first started teaching, one of the first things he taught, again and again, was the practice of generosity. When people came to him new to the practice, without any really knowledge of what the practice was, the first thing the Buddha taught was the practice of generosity. This comes up again and again in the Buddha's in the sutras, the teachings of the Buddha. Only after people had really appreciated and learned to understand the practice of giving would he then go on and teach the other meditative practices of mindfulness and of concentration and such. Generosity shows up throughout the Buddhist teachings in many different forms. It's the first of the three bases of meritorious deeds. It's the first of the four means of benefiting others. And probably most importantly, it's the first of the 10 paramis, or perfections of the heart. These are 10 qualities that the tale goes that the Buddha spent lifetimes developing. 10 qualities of the heart that he developed before, in a lifetime, he could become enlightened. And generosity was the first of those. In the Buddhist teachings, generosity leads to fortunate rebirth. And this doesn't necessarily only apply to rebirth in other lives. It implies rebirth moment to moment. When you practice generosity, you're more likely to have a more fortunate next moment, which I find not only fascinating, but I also find true. So generosity can be like the basement or the ground floor of a really strong and fruitful Buddhist practice. I've evidenced this a lot when I went to Thailand 10 years ago and practiced in a monastery there. And right now I have some friends in Burma that are practicing in monasteries. And you get a very strong first-hand experience of how important generosity is to a Buddhist practice in a number of ways. One is that when you go to a monastery in Thailand or Burma, it's free. You don't pay anything. And the food comes from the people that live in the area. The people that surround the monasteries feed the monks and feed the Westerners that come to practice. So I have a friend right now. This woman's a lawyer and she's practicing in Burma, and these people in the surrounding community feed her for free, which I find fascinating. Not only that, but the monks, of course, live there for free. And the whole practice of a monastic life is a huge exercise in giving into the faith of generosity. They don't own anything. They have one robe, one bowl, but they have to have faith that they will be fed and taken care of, and that they will have a place to live and warmth and whatever. It's a total trust and generosity. And it's just the foundation of the practice there. One thing else I learned and experienced from that was the monks, by living like this, are also giving to the people in the area because they're giving the opportunity for people to practice generosity. And that is a gift. I started coming to GBF about 10 years ago, and I remember I heard a speaker speak one time about giving money to the homeless and giving money to panhandlers in San Francisco. And he said he saw it as a gift because they were giving him the opportunity to practice generosity. And I had never heard anything quite like that before, and it really stuck with me. And I sometimes remember that. I still get annoyed sometimes when people come up and, demand or ask for money. But it really is an opportunity to practice generosity, and that in itself is a gift sometimes. And that's a bit what I want to talk about. What is the gift? What are the gifts of practicing generosity? You find that you can gain happiness in giving things away. Try it out. It can make you very happy sometimes to give stuff away. You also are putting yourself in a position of wealth by giving things away because you're basically saying, I have enough and I can share. So you're putting yourself in a position of wealth, which is sort of being kind to yourself. You're also finding a sense of worth as a person by helping somebody else out in your act of giving. Oftentimes when you give, you notice you can get a sense of spaciousness in the mind. You can feel more opened, more not as tight, much more spacious. We live in a world that is created by our actions. And when we practice generosity, we are helping to create that world that is more open and spacious and generous by our own practice of generosity. And it also helps create a pleasant feeling in the mind. It feels good to give sometimes. I'll get into that more later because there can be different motivations for giving. The practice of generosity also can help us on our goals, on our path to liberation, to freeing the mind, to being happy, to not suffering. If the goal of our practice is the destruction of greed, hate, and delusion, the cultivation of generosity directly debilitates greed and hate while facilitating the pliancy of mind that allows the eradication of delusion. If we're more spacious in our mind, we're more apt to see things as they are. The Buddha himself said, generosity brings happiness at every stage of its expression. We experience joy in the forming the intention to be generous. We experience joy in the actual act of giving something. And we experience joy in the remembering the fact that we have given. So, we're happy at the beginning, we're happy at the middle, we're happy at the end. It's a good act. Excuse me. One reason I like to talk about my practice and my understanding of the practice sometimes is that the topic I choose to speak on becomes more central in my life while I'm preparing the talk. So the act of me giving what I can and what I know of some topic, I get something in return. Often I get great fruits in return. And for me, the past week or two, thinking about generosity has really been sweet. And this is one of the aspects of generosity in a way, is that it's not really like giving something away. And in essence, it's almost more like a trade sometimes, because when we give, we do get something in return. I sometimes think that people that are really stingy, if they really understood Buddhist practice, would really go for it. Or if people were really greedy, because you do get so much in return from this practice sometimes. And specifically from generosity. And I want to talk about a couple of aspects of that. When I first started coming to GBF, I met this friend, George Gajewski. I think some of you might remember George. He passed away about 5 or 6 years ago, and I'm probably not pronouncing his last name right, but he was an early teacher for me in many ways. And at the time, I was going through a breakup with a boyfriend that I had had for 12 years. And we were living together. We lived together for quite a while. And breakups can be very difficult. And I went to George and I said, do you have any advice on how to handle the breakup? And he said, handle it with as much generosity as you can. And at the time, my boyfriend was moving out, and we had shared a lot of our personal items for a long time. So I had the CD player, but I also had this little piece of shit portable CD player. And he asked me, he said, well, can I have that since you have the CD player? Can I have that when I move out into my own place? And I thought, well, of course you can. But then I thought, it's a piece of shit. So I went out and I bought him a new CD player. And as he was moving out, and with all that crap that goes on when you're breaking up with somebody, I gave him a CD player. And it changed everything dramatically. It really opened things up. And the next day, when he moved out, he bought me this big Buddha statue that's in my meditation room now. And gave that to me as a gift in return. And we remained really good friends. And I think we probably would have remained friends otherwise, but the whole thing was changed by this really simple act of generosity. So this advice I got from an early GBF friend was really pivotal in the quality of that breakup. So what can we be generous with? We can be generous with things, as I was with this ex when I gave him the CD player. But it's also, it's also being generous with spirit in many ways. We can also be generous with our time. Many people here spend a Saturday night a month doing a dinner at a homeless shelter. They take, a good part of their day, a good part of their Saturday to go make a meal. It's being very generous with time. It's a big act of generosity. And there again, too, the fruits come back. It is a trade. There's a sense of camaraderie amongst the people that cook, and there's a real sense of satisfaction when you see people really enjoy the meal. And I'm also always impressed whenever I do that as the quality of the thanks that are given from the people at the homeless shelter, and the feeling that you get from hearing those thanks. One thing that I love considering in as an act of generosity is forgiveness. I think forgiveness can be a huge act of generosity. And I think part of it is when you forgive somebody, you're giving them the gift of allowing them to make mistakes, of allowing them to have failings, of allowing them to be deluded, hateful, anger, whatever. If you can forgive that, you're giving the gift of allowing them to be that. And when you give that gift, when you are generous with that forgiveness, you're also giving it to yourself. And I love that because I make big mistakes sometimes, and I can be really stupid, and I have to be able to forgive myself that too, and I would love it if other people could also forgive that. The act of generosity can be a big support for our meditation practice. And as I said, the Buddha really taught, and from what I've told in Asia, the practice of generosity is really emphasized in the practice before the meditation practices begin. It becomes the foundation, sort of the base from which the practices can begin. Because if you come into a practice with a giving heart and with a spacious mind, you're more apt to be able to confront the difficulties that arise in your meditation practice. And I'm sure, I know I can speak for myself, that when you sit for a long period of time, difficulties do arise. And if you're able to have a more spacious mind and are comfortable with the whole aspect of letting go, the whole generosity aspect of not holding on, of letting go, when difficulties arise, they're easier to deal with. You don't hold on to them. You don't get stuck quite in the same way. I didn't bring a watch today.
I'm watching. Did you want to have time for
I want to have time for questions. So,
About 6 more minutes.
okay, thanks.
Or 10 more minutes.
Some of our specific meditation practices I really see as generosity practices. The whole practice, I don't know if you practice metta, but I imagine most of you are familiar with the practice of metta. And it's really the practice of loving kindness, and it's a practice of giving and sharing loving kindness. Saying the simple phrases, may you be happy, may you be peaceful, may you be in good health. Those are gifts. It's a practice of generosity. It's things you're wishing for other people. And I know oftentimes in closing, and I believe it's a general practice here, that when after a day of meditation and a day of practice, there's a sharing of the merit, a giving of whatever merit that has occurred during the practice and sharing it with all beings. That's an act of generosity. I wanted to talk briefly about, there's many motivations that can be behind generous acts. And the Buddha talks about those. He in one sutta he enumerates the 8 motives of generosity. And number 1 was the giving with annoyance, a way of offending or insulting the recipient. I think we've all probably felt that at a time or two. It's a way of getting back at people. Fear can be a motivation. Number 2 is fear can be a motivation for offering. I'm afraid of what will happen if I don't give something. Number 3 is giving in return for a favor done. And number 4 is giving in return for a desired favor. It's having expectations about I have to give, or I want something, so I will give. Number 5 is giving because it's considered good. Number 6, giving because of altruistic motives. I'll look better if I come across as a giving person. Which also ties into number 7, giving to gain a good reputation. And number 8 is giving to adorn and beautify the mind. This is what the Buddha said should be the motivation behind giving. We give to basically free our own mind. Now I know when I practice generosity that there are often many motives that underlie my giving. I'm certainly not beyond giving for altruistic means or for a good reputation or even as like an act of vengeance sometimes. But I often realize that there's many motives for giving and that I can feel many motives for giving. And I don't want to stop myself in the act of being generous because I detect a hint of altruism or wanting a good reputation. That I can trust enough in the fact that there is motivation that I'm giving out of the generosity of my heart and out of the desire to be free, that the act of giving is a good act. And I just like to emphasize that because sometimes I find myself not wanting to give if I find some of my motivations aren't what I consider to be pure motivations. I think it's also good to get into the habit of giving. So not to be maybe as concerned about the motives sometimes, but to get into the habit and to realize what the results can be and the fruits can be of acts of generosity. In closing, I'd like to just mention that generous acts are also a way to connect us. They're really sort of an act that oftentimes become more of us instead of me and you or us and them. They can be really acts of connection. And in this way we can maybe find ourselves not quite so isolated. And I think as gay men that can be an important thing. I thank you for reading the purpose of GBF. And I was thinking about that some this morning when I was thinking about presenting a talk on generosity. How does generosity particularly pertain to us as gay men? And a few things came up to my mind. A few of them is I think we can sometimes be particularly at harm for greed in some ways, because two things sort of came to mind. As gay men, we aren't normally in the role of raising children. And I think raising children is an inherent situation that really promotes generosity. You really have to give when you have kids. We don't have that normally. I mean, I imagine some of you might have kids, but we don't have that as a normal situation that really demands us to be generous. And we also are sort of subject to trying to find ourselves in a world that really hasn't recognized us. And a lot of that is based on sex in a sort of overt way, so that I find a lot of the imagery out there for gay men right now is to be young, wealthy, beautiful, slim, hairless, blah, blah, blah. And it sets up a neediness and a greediness, not a greediness, more of a neediness and an unsatisfactory way that can play into our generosity in some ways. So I just want to bring that up as gay men to sort of reflect on that maybe a bit, and how to bring generosity in your life and be generous with yourself in our situation. And just in closing, there's that great bumper sticker that is all over the place, just practicing random acts of kindness. And if I ask of anything of us and me in our practice, and maybe as a resolution for the coming year, is to consider that. And just maybe every day, or every day for a week, or once a week, just go out and have it as an intention to go out and practice a random act of kindness or a random act of generosity. And just sort of see what happens. See how you feel. Notice the state in the body. Notice the state in the mind. Notice the state in the heart. And notice that it's not, like I said, not really an act of giving, but it can be really an act of trade. You get so much in return. So thank you.
An opportunity for a few minutes for questions.
I just want to make a comment. I never realized that hairlessness is one of the great goals. Again, because it comes so naturally to me, I never realized that. That's really one of my major contributions. So I appreciate that's being pointed out to. One of the practices that I have really struggled after And I can realize that a lot of the practice of generosity for me has to do with not knowing. Because one of the pieces that I've always struggled after was to get to the place that whenever I gave anything, I gave it from deep inside of myself. That it wasn't given grudgingly, because I'm a terrific person at giving grudgingly and doing tit for tat. Well, this person gave me that, so now I will give them. And the destructive part of that is that there was very little room in there for me to contact parts of myself that I didn't know anything about. So I've begun to shift my practice a little bit to open up to the possibility of giving when some part of me doesn't want to. And allowing me to contact that part of grudginess in myself, to have compassion and generosity towards myself in that place. Because what I've discovered is that afterwards, I have a completely new and different experience than I had before. It cannot be boxed in. It can't be pre-visioned. That isn't the way of generosity. I think there has to be a really important component of not knowing. And so, because I was judging myself, saying, well, I can't give now because I feel constrained, was a way of being disconnected and uncompassionate towards myself. So, making mistakes, understanding that my vision of myself is limited, and that I can act, I can be generous independently of that, is freeing. So I recently spent a week up in Mendocino with 3 very beloved friends. We've done this for 15 or 20 years. We are very close. And at the end of which we were feeling particularly loving and connected. And so one of the people said to me, in a very incredibly generous moment, he said, I want to know why your spiritual practice failed you. And so, of course, that evoked some curiosity. So, what do you mean? They said, well, when you were facing this major medical issue, you got upset and disturbed and disoriented. And it took you a while, like months, to really deal with it. And I want to know how you could have been practicing spiritual practice for all those years and have had that experience. And I really had to go inside myself to open up to that. And I had to say to him, you know, I understand that your experience of what happened to me, my own is a little different, that I needed some time and space to contact myself. And that my greatest priority was not, say, preserving my life, but making contact. And I know that must have looked very frightening to you on the outside. And I hear your concern, caring, and love for me. But we had different experiences. And I didn't want to say this to you because I was afraid it would sound too judgmental of my perception of you. But since you've asked so directly, and I was kind of waiting because this is a very strongly opinionated person. And he just came up to me and said, I've never felt so close to you as I feel right now. Things are very confused. And he said, I don't understand it, but I'm open to allowing it to. So generosity can come mysterious.
Yeah. Well, you bring up another topic that could be, a couple of weeks of discussion too about when does your practice fail you and what should your practice look like, right? Well, thanks for all that.
Right there.
I think that your topic is very timely too. For me, what resonated with the question was around the idea of Christmas. Because with my family, Christmas is, to me, such a great time of year because it's about giving gifts, it's about generosity. But in fact, it doesn't feel that way for me. And with my family and like a lot of traditions where you have to get them something and they have to get you something, and there's this whole kind of giving kind of thing, and obligation, and the stores kind of play into it. It just comes crashing down. And I actually spent Christmas with some friends again this year, which we had developed this rule where there's a 0 gift policy, which Christmas is around giving gifts, but we actually decided we're not giving gifts. And that felt really good. And kind of even realizing that it was kind of, in a way, a gift to one another to relinquish this responsibility around exchanging and giving gifts. And it's kind of ironic that I think of it as the time of year is supposed to represent that kind of feeling about giving and generosity, but yet it's the opposite for me. And I wonder if you have any thoughts on it.
Well, I think what you did sounds like a great thing, is to sort of back away from it. But I'd also recommend that you maybe consider other ways of giving, and that, like I was talking about with time, or with energy to certain maybe nonprofits, or to it's a time when a lot of people do food lines or give to food banks, or it's also, one year with my family I said, okay, instead of giving gifts, we're going to choose charities that the other person that you're giving to might want to have a gift given to. So the family did that, and that felt really good, and that sort of more fostered the feeling of giving in a way. And you also had to consider what charities the other person might respond to or might appreciate you giving a gift to, and things like that. I think a lot of times we do, and I agree with you, Christmas felt like crap to me this year again. I went into Macy's and it didn't feel right. And it was like it was an obligation. And I also felt tight with my money. It was like, well, what can I get for not a lot of money for some people? And there aren't feelings that I like so much. But there again, too, I'm falling into that trap of the generosity being based around things, when it can really be based around so much more. And, it can be writing a long letter to your family or your mother, or, giving of energy and of your spirit in that way, too, saying, what Christmas means to you, or just something around like that. So just to maybe think of other ways of opening up to generosity, and other ways generosity manifests itself. But thanks for bringing that up.
Bill, could you say more about generosity as it relates to, you just touched on the fantasy, physical images that are embedded in our culture. And you said generosity, but I didn't get the right.
Well, I didn't make a very good link, I realize. It was just... I think it really comes to being... It comes to generosity around forgiveness, around the difficulties we have as gay men. And it also comes around the marketing of homosexuality in this country. And it's a real market right now. I walked down the Castro the other day, and there's some magazine shop, and they have 10 gay magazines in the window now. There's so many, and every one of them had some extremely handsome man on the cover. We're marketed in that way. And, it's Queer Eye for the Straight Guy. As much as I really sort of enjoy that show, and as much as I see that show, what I like about that show is that it's a love story between gay and straight people, but it's also about, this is the way you need to be happy. This hair, these clothes, this kind of apartment, this kind of food, this kind of culture. It's blatant that way. It instigates a feeling of need in gay men, I think, in that sense. And that need creates this sort of greediness or wantingness that doesn't really flow with generosity sometimes, I don't think. That, and also we have to be generous with ourselves, that we live in this culture, that we're bombarded with it, that we fall for it, that, I have resolutions. I want to be generous, and I want to be thinner and in better shape, and I want to look better. Those are my resolutions. So it's part of it. So to be generous with that and with ourselves. Is that?
Yeah.
Well, thanks because I wasn't very clear with it before, and it was just thoughts I had over breakfast of how I can tie generosity into us as gay men and things that are sort of particular to us.
Clint?
I think you're right on, Bill. I think you say the opposite of generosity would be like narcissism, whereas it's sort of self-absorption. And sort
Right.
What I can do to make myself prettier or whatever, richer, whatever.
Right.
And, you know, God, I mean, my years resolution is to shed 20 pounds too. And, I have that, but it's just not striking a balance. And you have a subculture that, for whatever reason, does embrace narcissism to the degree that I think gay culture sometimes does. It's really hard to have a generous spirit. You're all so much involved in this, how you're being perceived.
Right. Right.
One more, Nicholas.
Yeah, I appreciate your topic. Yeah, I think it'd be good to have a discussion with this group around how we, fall victim to consumerism, all this, I mean, our mentors, the bitchy drag queen or circuit boy, and we've become kind of victims to that society, to consumerism in America this way. It'd be nice to talk about how we could be mentors for each other in a different way. Like this, at no cost, we have men together. And building other communities. There is other communities, but connecting them, kind of integrating other social venues that aren't all around, all this money and all this bars and, advertisements and everything, So it'd be nice to go into the Castro, go to some, the gay and lesbian center, not exactly in the Castro, but somewhere, where we could just go and, get a massage with each other, or, sit down and do the venue. It'd be nice to have a Buddhist center or something in the Castro somewhere, away from the consumerism.
You mentioned something, mentorism, and I think that's really important, and that's one act I would recommend people consider. One thing Clint does when he does the dinners at the homeless shelter is he puts up these signs saying the gay Buddhists are feeding you. So he's telling people out there that, these people coming in are gay and they're Buddhist, and we sort of represent another side of the queer culture that people don't see out there a lot. And I really respect that. And I think that when we go into places and we offer our time and our energy to be out as gay men and to show that we can be mentors and that we aren't all total victims of the consumer culture, and that we also work on issues of spirit and stuff. As unbelievably ghastly as AIDS was, there were also unbelievable gifts that I saw in the midst of that, and it showed the capacity of our heart and our ability to care and our ability to take care of, and that's important. And so to consider mentorships and to work with kids and to work with kids and to work with gay kids as out gay men and to show them that there's other aspects to this gay world than porn and poppers. I don't know. It's like, whatever. On that note.
and if there was such a movement that wasn't in the gay community, I think it would be really recognized in the media, like monks, the movement when they were taking care of people who were sick, AIDS, and because our culture is very compassionate.
Right. Right.
Bill, thank you very much. Extend to you our gratitude. Our host for this day.
Your host. For newcomers, if you have any questions, feel free to ask. We've got a high-tech teapot out there that's new, and I think water's hot. For directions on how to dispense some water for your spot of tea, there's a set of directions on the wall behind you. There's cookies out there too. Please be careful about crumbs. We've been told that rodents are visiting us, and I guess we want to be generous to them, but to struggle with that one. I'll dispense of any leftovers somewhere. Contributions, a Donna Bowl, our expenses of rent, a newsletter, and the community website, food. $5 if you can, more if you can, less. Sometimes people go for brunch afterwards, a group kind of coalesces.
Thank you. Any other announcements in the Sangha? Clint?
Yeah, Carol Newhouse was kind of a very good speaker for us. Scheduled to speak next week. Unfortunately, because of her death in her family, she won't be available, so there will be an open discussion. Some of them facilitating.
David and then Nicholas.
Just a reminder, I think many of us have received in the mail opportunity to contribute to the overall ongoingness of GPF in addition to our $5 here. And I guess what I was just going to say is whatever money you give there would be more than welcome. It could be $1. It doesn't make a difference. Whatever you feel able and willing and want to.
And Peter, we're still looking for volunteers for hosting.
Actually, through some generosity, people have filled this. And you can still, I think you're serving double duty. Somebody's serving double duty. We could still, if someone wants to donate some time once every 2 months to do what I'm doing today, please see me.
I'd like to invite anyone. I'm going Tuesday. It's the first Tuesday of the month. It's free at the Asian Art Museum, which is really wonderful. And we have a visiting. If anyone wants to go, come up to me and talk to me this Tuesday.
There's a couple more.
Just to remind people that at Spirit Rock, the end of February, there's a 2-day weekend retreat, non-residential retreat with 2 wonderful gay meditation teachers, Eric Colvig and Irina Weissman. It's the 27th and 28th, a Saturday and Sunday from 9:30 to 5. And then also April 6th to 11th at Spirit Rock is a 5-night silent retreat for the lesbian and gay Sangha as well. And you can get information at the website, spiritrock.org. And I know a lot of us, or some of us, have done this 5-night retreat in the past, and it's quite a wonderful experience if you can manage to get away.
I've heard nothing but wonderful fruit from that experience. Paul.
Yeah, and we usually have the steering committee meetings. We had been having the steering committee on the first Sunday of the month, but because of scheduling conflicts here, I emailed Viveka, is that her name? Yeah, always get it, got it stuff. And said we would take the second Sunday, but I didn't realize that in the newsletter it said there would be a meeting, steering committee meeting today. But I've been announcing it for next week for a couple of weeks. So that's when we'll have it. And I hope Nicholas and other people who have ideas for projects come to the meeting, because that's one of the things that would be fruitful to discuss. What can we do to enhance our lives outside of sitting here? Or a suggested topic maybe for next Sunday could be what Nicholas said. But the steering committee is really almost an ad hoc committee of whoever shows up on that particular day. I think there's, I don't know, there's telling someone, there might be 4 official members now of the steering committee, maybe 5. So that's pretty minimal. So the more people that would come, the next one next Sunday, we just meet. I facilitate. I try to get out in an hour or less. If you have any ideas about the newsletter, about the website, about what we're doing here on Sundays, topics for talks, anything, we really need the input. Otherwise, we're kind of floundering here. We're floundering here anyway. So we're floundering kind of input from the group where we should be going.
Be generous with your floundering.
Yeah. Thank you.
I'd also like to say I'm teaching a beginning meditation class, a beginning Vipassana class at the Unitarian Church starting Thursday, January 22nd. If anybody's interested in that, please come up and talk to me afterwards and I'll give you some information. It's a 5-week course meeting Thursday nights from 7 to 9 o'clock.
We'll draw together in closure for the time. We form a circle, take one another's hands. David, would you be willing to offer the dedication of marriage?
By the power and truth of this practice, may all beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all be freed from sorrow and the causes of sorrow. May all never be separated from the sacred happiness, which is without sorrow. And may all live in equanimity, without too much attachment or too much aversion, and live believing in the equality of all that lives.
Thank you for listening to the Gay Buddhist Forum. If you would like to hear several new talks per month and be notified of upcoming speakers so you can participate live, please subscribe to this podcast, like us on Facebook, and join our mailing list by visiting gaybuddhist.org.